It's 6:54 a.m. and you've overslept. You take a shower, then you dress, then a rush to brush your teeth and hair, then wallet, keys, phone, and out the door with a hope and a prayer. You start the car and head down the road, from suburb to stroad to highway stretch. Your tank is near E, so you take a detour, and while there you grab breakfast at the supermarket store. You get to work at 8:03 and sink into your routine till your time can be free. Or perhaps your morning takes a different route. You sprint through the station to make your commute. Then at your stop off the train, you take a bus down the lane before clocking into the old ball and chain. Whichever path you took, your itinerary converged with perhaps thousands of others in non-places. The route from your first place, the home, to your second place, work or school, took you through various supermodern spaces, non-places, including highways, train stations, and supermarkets. Rinse and repeat endlessly. If you'll allow me a touch of drama, this may sometimes feel like a Groundhogian torment. But we can save that for a discussion on time or the nature of work under capitalism. Perhaps you make room in your life for more breaks from routine. Maybe you have a third place to call home. Maybe you don't. In any case, few can say they truly enjoy the right to the city in all its implications. Truly radical spaces of encounter are niche, few, and far between. I'm throwing a lot of terms at you at once. Let's pull back. We exist in physical space. Our bodies respond to such spaces. These spaces affect us. Anthropologists are among those who study such spaces as they relate to people. One anthropologist in particular was concerned with how, as a consequence of supermodernity, a term I'll explain in a moment, many of our spaces have come to disregard concerns of relations, history, and identity in favor of pure functionality. French anthropologist Marc Augé wrote about this phenomenon in the seminal Non-Places, Introduction to an Anthropology of Supermodernity in 1992. What I intend to argue, building on his work and that of others, is that the rise of supermodernity, under the auspices of hierarchical power, has proliferated non-places for atomized people, leaving us malnourished of the spatial and social connectivity necessary to flourish as human beings in humane societies. Thus, we must pioneer new spaces, ones of encounter, to reestablish our lost connections, build new ones, and reclaim our right to the city. But first, we need to understand supermodernity. Now, modernity is generally characterized by industrialization, urbanization, rationalization, and the proliferation of new technologies and social forms. We trace a transition between traditional and modern societies, often into phases, hence early modernity, encompassing the Renaissance and Enlightenment, classical modernity, associated with the Industrial Revolution, and late modernity, seen in the post-World War II era of technology, mass media, and globalization. Supermodernity is a separate beast. As defined by Augé, this is the current stage, where the characteristics of late modernity are intensified, and there's an even greater emphasis on speed, mobility, and individualism, facilitated by advanced technology and global networks. Supermodernity is marked by a constant stream of events and information, creating a sense of acceleration and immediacy. Augé wrote about this even before the rise of social media and the explosion of the internet. Nowadays, this flow of events is even more overwhelming, making it difficult for people to ground themselves in the present. Whether we're speaking of the phases of modernity or the rise of supermodernity, we're dealing with developments that came about under the auspices of hierarchical power. Here, I'm using hierarchy in an anarchist sense, referring to the stratification of society which gives some individuals, groups, or institutions authority over others, as in the recognized right above others in a social relationship to give commands, make decisions, and enforce obedience. As we live under the hegemony of hierarchy, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that society under its rule is the only way that society can be organized. But there are other paths we can take. Most relevantly for our present discussion, supermodernity creates an abundance of spaces of transience and anonymity. Spaces that lack historical, relational, and identity-based significance. Spaces like airports, highways, and shopping centers, where social interactions are minimal and governed primarily by functionality. Non-places. Unlike what Augé calls anthropological places, which are imbued with meaning, history, and significance, and shaped by practices and interactions that form the backdrop of individual and collective identities, non-places exist in stark contrast, apparently absent of such social vibrance. Even when crowded, non-places are marked by solitude, as representative of the supermodern shift from an emphasis on community toward individual consumption and experience. From this understanding of non-places, we can locate the starkest encapsulation of the rise of supermodernity, all too easily observed in any major city, as the dehumanized homeless occupy non-places, existing in a state of double dispossession. It's important to recognize that non-places are not bad places per se. Of course, some spaces will lend themselves more to functionality than sociality. Modes of transportation exist primarily to transport people, and transit stations should facilitate that goal. Car parks have to store cars, and hotels exist to provide temporary accommodation. We should also recognize the ways in which non-places currently exist far more dynamically than how Augé might present them. In British geographer Peter Merriman's critique called Driving Places, he argues that Augé's concept is too rigid and fails to account for the complex and varied experiences people have in these spaces. He suggests that non-places are not entirely devoid of meaning, as people can develop attachments and meanings even in transient spaces like motorways. As an alternative concept, Merriman advocates for a more dynamic sense of place, focusing on the multiple and partial placings that arise through travel and movement. Placings refers to the fluid and relational processes through which spaces, even those that would be considered non-places, acquire meaning and significance as they are subjectively experienced. Placings are not fixed. They are in a constant state of becoming, continually produced and reproduced through interactions, movements, and practices. A highway can become a place of protest. People still manage to turn shopping centers into social spaces, despite their hostility toward non-commercial use. And you want to know when a New York City subway is not just a subway? For the 5 minutes between stops when a doo-wop ensemble turns it into a stage. True story. French multidisciplinary Michel de Certeau understood that as we navigate spaces daily, we create our own meaning, even in the most impersonal of environments. But even in minding this critical understanding of the potential dynamism of non-places, we can still be concerned by the rapid expansion of non-places like shopping centers, strip malls, highways, and fast food chains under capitalism, and their consequences on our social and environmental well-being. Supermodernity is excess. It is hyper-consumerism. It is widening roadways and deepening strip mines. It is data centers that gulp down our water into billions of gallons each year. What does it mean for the natural world when the tendrils of supermodern capitalist expansion stretch into the most fragile ecosystems, all for the sake of our acceleration toward God knows what? As non-places are marked by their transience and anonymity, how can our social selves flourish when the public spaces available to us are so defined, and we can hardly ground ourselves in the places we occupy? Perhaps the proliferation of non-places would be more bearable if we had some control over their development, or if we could easily access third places to act as a reprieve. But unfortunately, we must also lament the denial of our right to the city and the decline of third places thanks to the powerless position we are placed in as individuals in a hierarchical society. For those who haven't seen my videos on solarpunk cities and third places or heard the terms elsewhere, the right to the city and third places may be unfamiliar to you, but you may have already picked up on their meaning based on context. Put simply, the right to the city refers to French Marxist philosopher Henri Lefebvre's call to action to reclaim the city from bureaucrats and bourgeoisie as a co-created space for a transformed, renewed, and self-managed urban life. The right to the city is the right to urban life in common, to a renewed centrality, to places of meetings and exchanges, to a rhythm of life that allows the full and entire use of these moments and places. British Marxist geographer David Harvey once said that the right to the city is the freedom to make and remake our cities and ourselves. The right to the city is the right of the oppressed to take power and open new and better ways of urban living, untethered by the state. Third places, as established by American sociologist Ray Oldenburg, complete the trifecta of the home and the workplace by being the social spaces that anchor community life. According to Oldenburg's 8 defining characteristics, third places exist on neutral ground, function as equalizers of social status, provide an environment where conversations are at the center, keep a low profile, are open and accommodating, have an essence shaped by their regulars, characterized by playfulness and a sense of home away from home. As I discussed in my video on the subject, I think third places need to be taken in a more radical direction. Radical third places can operate in the commons as places to decompress, as muster points for radical activity, as spaces for diverse and inclusive networks to form, and even as hubs of mutual aid. But there's a limit to the extent to which you can stretch the concept of third places before it becomes far too distinct from its original purpose. So I've recently begun advocating for spaces of encounter alongside radical third places as a different but related concept. Spaces of encounter are not as strict in their required characteristics as third places may be. You can check out my video on organizing anarchy for more, but all that's needed for a space to be considered a space of encounter is that they are non-hierarchical spaces where people of diverse interests can find and connect with others of common concern, interest, or desired action, all in accordance with the principle of free association, which just refers to the ability of each individual to move around and associate or disassociate with others as they so choose. Bringing all of these concepts together and orienting ourselves toward goal-focused discussion, we might say that under the rallying call of the right to the city, we must fight for and build radical third places and spaces of encounter to revitalize our social lives, our collective control over our spaces, and our ability to participate meaningfully in political life. So how do we do that? Here's where a solid grasp of the three-factor approach to social revolution may be useful, alongside a hefty dose of political imagination. By three-factor approach, I'm referring to the need for acts of confrontation, non-cooperation, and prefiguration taken in tandem to achieve lasting change. I have a video on the subject if you're curious, but most relevantly, undertaking acts of confrontation, such as occupation and reclamation, and acts of prefiguration, like establishing community land trusts, will both be necessary to open up spaces of encounter and assert our right to the city. Finally, remember the concept of placings, that any and everywhere can become a space of encounter, produced and reproduced through the interactions, movements, and practices of a people intent on being free. All power to all the people. Peace. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share with your fellow peoples. Thanks to the seedlings, the saplings, and especially the roots for making all of this possible, including our newest members, Scheherazade, Humphrey McGumphrey, Rowan Butler, and Anarcho Drogger. You can join these beautiful humans and support me too on patreon.com/sainttrue. Check out my other videos for a range of radical topics. Thanks again. Peace.